What happens when comments become a crisis? Believe it or not, a crisis doesn't always begin with a big lawsuit. Neither does it always begin with a tremendous financial loss or even a formal stakeholder complaint. Sometimes a crisis can start just with a microphone, a camera, and a comment that lands the wrong way with a key stakeholder group. And today on Boardroom Minutes, I want to talk about the board's role in crisis management when an organization's reputation and brand are under pressure. First, I want to welcome you back to Boardroom Minutes, which is your premier and trusted channel for things concerning boardroom matters for profit corporations, nonprofit organizations, and religious institutions like churches. I'm your host, Marcus Brantley Esquire, and I'm glad that you're tuning in on my channel. So, look, this is not about attacking personalities. As a matter of fact, this is kind of deviating from my normal Boardroom Minutes episodes, but I thought this would be an excellent current news related topic that's tied to governance. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, strictly about governance. So, look, when an organization has a public platform, also a loyal community base, which includes sponsors, customers, members, donors, vendors, and partners, the board cannot treat a reputational crisis as merely a public relations issue because you know what? It's a governance issue. Now, recently, it's been reported in the news that Earn Your Leisure, which is a podcast of two gentlemen, and their annual event called InvestFest has been part of a public conversation after comments surfaced by one of the founder podcasters concerning whether their annual event, InvestFest, was actually a quote unquote Black event. And there were those that were expressing, well, actually, the podcaster was expressing frustration with criticism that was coming from the Black community. But be it as it may, the backlash matters because InvestFest has been strongly associated with financial literacy, entrepreneurship, wealth building, culture in the Black community. So when a major stakeholder group feels dismissed, disrespected, or even taken for granted, that is not just a social media problem. That becomes a boardroom issue. Now, I don't know if Earn Your Leisure has a board. I don't know if it's an LLC. I don't know its entity type. But if it is incorporated, then it should have a board. And this backlash then becomes a boardroom issue. Why? Because stakeholders don't only evaluate what an organization sells, but they also evaluate how the organization, what it says, how it responds to crises like this, and whether it still honors the community that helped build the brand. And in this instance, it is the Black community where the backlash is coming from. So, the governance principle here, and what we often talk about in Boardroom Minutes, is to keep in mind that the board does not run the daily operation. So let's keep that clear. However, the board must help protect the mission, the reputation, and the long term trust of the organization. And in the context of this episode and the current event news, Earn Your Leisure. So, in a crisis, the board should not be silent or passive, and neither should it be reactionary. The board should ask what happened, who are the affected stakeholders, what risk is created by those comments that were stated, what is going to be management's response plan, right? Because management is responsible for the day to day. The board partners with management to make sure there's proper execution and that the backlash is mitigated. The board should also consider what message needs to be sent. What must be done to restore trust? And that's profound. You have to restore trust, especially among your stakeholders, those that support you. Now, the board's role is not to embarrass management. No, it's to support management while making sure the organization responds with wisdom, accountability, and with clarity. Now, why do stakeholders matter? Why does your base matter? Because every organization has stakeholders. And I'm sure Earn Your Leisure has stakeholders. Now, for a church, and for those that may not know, I am a pastor, and I also do board governance, not just for churches, but for nonprofit organizations. But for a church, a stakeholder may include the church's members, of course, also the visitors that attend the church, leaders in the church, the donors to the church, volunteers, community partners, and also the broader community in which the church is based or headquartered. Also, for nonprofit organizations, their stakeholders may include their clients, the grantors, donors, regulators, because they are creatures of state regulation, employees, volunteers, and also the community that the nonprofit serves. Those are stakeholders. Now, for a conference brand like InvestFest and Earn Your Leisure, the stakeholders, of course, will include the attendees, your base community, sponsors that contribute to the event, of course, your vendors who are at the event. That's an attraction for your attendees, the speakers. A lot of celebrities, I've been told, attend the event, media partners, also the whole city. And in this case, I believe it was Atlanta, and also the greater Atlanta community that identifies with the brand. All of these stakeholders must be considered and are part of your reputation risk formula. You don't want to damage your reputation. Now, when stakeholders feel dishonored, when they feel ignored or dismissed, trust can go down the toilet. It can erode quickly. It can take years to build trust, but can only take a comment to tank it and to erode it. And once trust is damaged, the cost of repair is usually higher than the cost of early wise communication. Now, what is the board's role in managing reputation risk? Well, in a reputational crisis, the board should be directly involved in oversight. Again, not in the day-to-day micromanagement. That belongs to the CEO and his team. However, the board should help ensure that leadership does five main things. And let's just quickly spell those out. One, the board should assess the risk. Why? Because if this is a short-term controversy, or it could have an impact long-term and eventually affect the attendance, in this case, the next InvestFest, that is. It can impact sponsorships, partnerships, donations, member trust, of course, and just the long-term brand value. As a matter of fact, your special guests may not even want to attend because of the controversy. So you have to assess the risk. Then you have to make sure you identify the stakeholders to make sure that they're shored up. Who needs to hear from the organization? And in this case, the core community, the core stakeholders, from what I've read, is the Black community. You have to assess who feels harmed. You also have to identify who needs reassurance. And right now, we know who needs the reassurance. Then you have to clarify the message. Very important. And your response should not sound dismissive. It shouldn't sound defensive. It shouldn't even sound overly polished. you definitely shouldn't double down on it. But your communication, your messaging, it should be honest, measured, and also accountable, because accountability builds trust. You make a mistake, own it, apologize for it, so that you can then move on, not just waiting for people to have short memories, because folk do not have short memories. And then you want to align your words with action. You don't want to just have empty words, put forth a message, and it's not backed up by action, right? Because if the organization says it values the community, how are you demonstrating that value? How are you showing the community that you mean what you say? And then after that, you need to monitor the aftermath, because a single statement does not end every crisis. Just because you deliver the message doesn't mean that the crisis is thin. So you want to follow up, and the board should require the follow up from management. There should be reporting done, and there should also be lessons learned, so the same mistake is not made. So let me just briefly, and I want to try to keep this under 15 minutes, kind of share with you my personal experience in leadership, as I was the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar credit union in New York City. And back when Hurricane Sandy occurred, the ATMs and the financial infrastructure went down, and there was no communication with the members. And from this experience as a chair, I knew that crisis management was necessary, because the reputation of the credit union was about to be damaged. So even though I was out of town, and actually the board was out of town on a retreat, as board chair, I had conversations with the CEO and his management team. And I said to them, it was important for us to touch base with our stakeholders, namely our members. And as such, the CEO gave me the green light, along with the board of directors, to reach out to our radio station that we had a relationship with. It was a very large radio station, especially in the community where our members, where they listen to. And I was able to craft a message letting them know that the credit union team, management team, is on top of this, and we will have the ATMs and the branches restored for service. And you know what? That helped calm fears. That helped to mitigate the reputation risks that would have occurred had we stayed silent. So the lesson from that is that you need to get ahead of the crisis. You need to make sure your stakeholders are shored up. You need to let them know that they're valued, and that you're doing everything within your power to make sure that their service is restored and that it's also appreciated. That experience taught me something very important, and that is, in a crisis, people do not only want to know that systems are restored, but they want to know that their confidence is restored. That's true for credit unions. That's true for nonprofits. That's true for churches and for any other organization, even if you're a for-profit corporation. Now, what boards shouldn't do, and what causes boards to make mistakes in a crisis, thinking about what I was faced with when Hurricane Sandy hit, and that is, boards should not stay silent too long. You can't assume that the issue, that the crisis, and in this instance, those comments that were made unfortunately, by the one of the owners, you can't assume that it's just going to go away, that's going to blow over. Also, you can't, as a board, allow management to be isolated. You have to work with them. You have to partner with them, because it's up to the board to protect the mission. Now, you do not want to treat the organization's reputation risk as just a PR problem, because reputation is not just public relations. Reputation is an asset. Reputation is built in, it's baked in your goodwill, which is an asset of the organization. So for a church and or a nonprofit, your reputation is connected to trust. You won't have donors, you won't have members tithing and giving offerings unless they know they can trust you and that their offerings, their donations are being stewarded properly. And that's why credibility matters and staying on mission. Now, for those that are public facing brands like InvestFest, Earn Your Leisure, your reputation is connected to customer loyalty. And so it is with other organizations, but mainly public facing. Customer loyalty and valuing your customers are very important. Also, sponsor confidence, event attendance, and future partnerships of the utmost importance. And the board must understand that, look, the brand trust can be built over years. And I mentioned this, but it can be damaged in such a short period of time, even in minutes. Now, some practical boardroom questions that boards should ask when there's a crisis. Well, do we have a crisis communication plan in place? That's where pre-planning comes in as a policy. The board should make sure in their policy manual that there is a crisis communication plan. In other words, you decide ahead of time who will speak for the organization. When will management notify the board? Management should not wait until there's fallout and that the reputation is damaged to then all of a sudden notify the board. Which issues require board level involvement? Because everything doesn't require elevation to the board level. There's certain things management can handle, but we're talking about the major crises that the board should be notified, things that will impact the long-term mission of the organization. The board needs to know. Then you need to identify, as we mentioned, the affected stakeholders. And in this current news, the Black community should be identified as being impacted by the comments that were made. Now, you also need to assess as a board, how do we balance the legal risk with moral responsibility? Always comes into play, and it's always good to have legal counsel to guide you. How do you communicate without sounding defensive? We talked about that as well. How do we follow up after the first public response? How do we track this? How do we track stakeholder public opinion? And if your board has never discussed these questions, guess what? Your crisis plan only exists in theory. It's only on paper. And theory is not going to protect the organization when the phones are ringing, when social media is moving fast, and we are in a social media world. When your sponsors are watching, your stakeholders feel not valued. They feel hurt by your comments. So you need to make sure your crisis plan is ready for implementation. And I think we're going to end it right there. And for this governance episode, the big lesson is, and from this current event, it's bigger than just that one podcast mistake, or it's bigger than one conference or comment. You're talking about the brand. So when a public statement creates stakeholder backlash, the board must pay attention. Not trying to control every word, not trying to replace management. You have to support management, not chasing every online opinion. That's not the strategy. but you want to make sure that the organization protects its mission, also values and honors its stakeholders, and responds to the crisis with clarity, also with accountability and wisdom. And a strong board understands that crisis management is not only about what happened, not only what's in the news, but what about the organization and what it does next. So, in closing, if your church or nonprofit board needs help strengthening governance, crisis readiness, or meeting structure and board accountability, why don't you put in the comments and I can talk with you about governance training? Because when reputation is on the line, the board should not be missing from the conversation. So we're going to end it right there. Thank you for tuning in. This is Marcus Brantley, Esquire of Boardroom Minutes, which is your premier and trusted channel discussing the clear, concise insights into the issues that shape today's boardrooms for nonprofit organizations, not-for-profit organizations, also religious institutions like churches. If you're not a subscriber yet, why don't you hit the subscribe button? And if you like this episode, why don't you hit the like button as well? Help me to expand this channel to get out this important information for those that have these particular organizations and want governance strengthened. All right. Hope to see you on next week. Lord willing, take care.